Hello, this is Ralph Bivins. This is the Ralph Bivins Project. We can, we're here. We're here to talk about growth. We're here to talk about real estate. We're here to talk about change. We're here to talk about transportation. And you can, just a word of brief self-introduction. Hey, realtynewsreport.com is, I'm the publisher of that, the editor of that. And so if you want to check out some fresh news, fresh thoughts, fresh stories, that's you can read it there. This interview and this program we're going to do right now is going to be linked there. It'll be easy to find, to share with others. We hope you do. And but we're calling this the Ralph Bivins Project, and so we're here to talk about new things that need to be worked on. Okay, and we're really happy today. You know, Ann Taylor is going to be with me today for this show, and she's been executive director for ULI in Houston and San Antonio for a lot of years. Did some really interesting things there, like national advisory panels on recovering from flooding in Galveston, National ULI Advisory Council, bringing in experts from around the world to study these issues. And she directed that on reusing our new plans for the Astrodome, and she's also on the board of the Astrodome Conservancy, by the way. Maybe we'll get to that later, I hope. And she's done things on technical assistance panels on transit-oriented development, reinvesting in historic communities, reviving underperforming commercial corridors. And so she's got a lot of experience about thinking about the future of cities, and she's done a lot of study on it, has a lot to say. And she's also been, senior vice president at Midway, one of the big commercial real estate developers here in Texas and in other places. And then she has a new venture, Wide Ranging and Company, which provides organizations responsible for land use and the built environment with things about branding and ideas about getting their message out. So she's got a lot of background, and we're here to talk with her today. So thank you so much for being here, taking time to be with me. And we're this in the middle of the pandemic. It's still happening. It's still happening. So we're looking at this some point in the future that, hopefully you can remember how it was when everybody's concerned about this, and it's changing our lives. It's changing everything we do. And so I just Houston, where we've done a lot of work, Houston, Texas, is that right now they're considering doing another shutdown. It's impacted companies, and it's impacted so many people. What do you think? Where are we right now? What's going on with Houston and the pandemic, and with our people and with our companies? Where are we right now?
Well, we're in July, and I think none of us thought we would be here in July, meaning, working from home and having bars closed, oh my goodness, and not being able to have large gatherings. And, all of that is just, I think there's a collective grieving that's going on about the loss of just normalcy, normal day to day. And I've told my 5-year-old grandson that he should be keeping a journal about this time, because I know my 87-year-old father, we will sometimes ask him. He was born in 1933 in the depth of the Great Depression and lived through World War II, Hitler, Pearl Harbor, all kinds of things that happened in his lifetime as a young boy growing up. And, I think for people like my grandson, one day, God willing, he will be talking to his kids and grandkids, and they'll say, what was it like? What was that time like? And so, ultimately, I am optimistic. And this is one of the things that those of us who really care about things like environmental sustainability and, averting climate change catastrophes and things like that, we will say it's too late to be pessimistic. We cannot afford the luxury of being a pessimist. We have to be optimistic. We have to move forward with hope. And, even looking back at the 1918 pandemic that a lot of us are talking about now, the flu pandemic of 1918.
It's horrible.
Yeah, how grim that was. And yet, people got through that and they went on. And so I think, it's important for us to recognize we are in this historic moment. And in some ways, I think people working from home have now been doing it long enough that we've sort of adapted to it. And I know a lot of people who've gone through this intense period where if they were fortunate enough that they kept their job, they did not get laid off. They've been just working so hard and pushing themselves so hard because there's this feeling of, I have to prove I'm valuable. I have to prove I'm productive. And employers have actually gotten a lot of productivity out of those folks who are working from home, right? So
it is. And it is historic. I totally agree. I think you've had, World War II, and that was so historic, and the change that it went on for the next 50, 60 years out of that was amazing. Everything from women working outside the home, just on and on and on. When you look back at that big piece of transformative history that changed everything after it. And some people right now are so that this is probably on that level. This is probably on that level of being this historic event that's going to change things for the next 30 years or more. And one of the things we talked about it changing is this idea of, well, I don't want to be in a crowded place. I don't want right now, hey, you don't want to get in an elevator with other people. You have to have 6 foot distancing in the elevators. That pretty much limits it to 2 or 4 people, maybe. It's a big elevator. Those kind of things. I don't want to get on a subway. I don't want to crowd on the subway and go down a sidewalk in New York where people will bump into you. Every day, there's the whole thing, office space, sharing desk, the whole deal that where we were has kind of come, and where we live too. If you're in a high rise in New York, do you want to be getting on the elevator a lot with other people you don't know?
Yeah.
So what's the response? There's a big idea coming out of this. I think there's truth there, and I think we know that the people are shopping for homes in the suburbs or beyond, or in smaller markets. We know that's happening, and there's a lot of people theorizing that it's going to be there's going to be people companies moving from downtowns to the suburbs, or they're going to move out of New York and set up shop in Omaha or something down. This coming out of this decentralization, which it's probably going to happen to some extent. What extent? I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, full disclosure, I love cities, and I am an urban person to my core. And I hope, again, I'm optimistic. I hope that cities will be resilient and will continue to thrive, and for a lot of reasons, one of which is I think it's understandable that there is fear, and there may be a reaction, a more immediate reaction but for a lot of reasons, sending people sprawling ever outward, putting more people in individual automobiles, in the long run is going to have a really detrimental impact. And so, and I actually have seen research that's been conducted by Johns Hopkins University that shows that, in fact, people who live in dense urban environments have not suffered mortality at higher rates. The dense urban environments have had lower mortality rates overall, and the spread of infection has not been increased by density itself. And that's what the research is showing. It's more about our behavior, what we do individually, and also the benefits that happen in large metropolitan, dense metropolitan areas tend to have better health care. People can access greater, medical expertise, things like that. So, that's the science that's emerging. What we know about human behavior and what science shows us, they often are not even remotely related to each other. So
there's stuff happening with, I think one of the companies that maybe it's Redfin or Zillow or one of those guys that do a lot of analysis of what people are looking for houses. They report, at least for home shopping, there's a lot of people shopping for homes out in the sticks.
right.
That's the way it is. Not just suburban. I mean, small town, rural. There's momentum towards that.
People are looking online.
Whether they actually buy it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people looking at houses online right now too. I mean, the HAR, Houston Association of Realtors website, tons of people just shopping around and looking up 70%.
Yeah.
Compared to this time last year. Just people that they don't have anything to do, so hey, let me go cruise, browse around on some residential sites, see what's for sale.
Well, yeah, and my husband and I, that's his favorite leisure time activity is, he was showing me houses in Portland, Maine, and he was showing me houses in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so, we've been looking at a lot of things. Now, will we actually move out of our urban apartment? I live on the 21st floor of a very urban apartment building. And, am I going to move to Portland, Maine anytime soon? No. I'm not. So, we look at all.
It's fun to shop.
we look at all kinds of things online on the internet that may or may not have anything to do with our real everyday behavior. But no, I mean, absolutely. I know that companies are looking at things like satellite office locations. And that's, that was a trend. I would say that, our friend David Wolf and Wolf Companies, they certainly foresaw that happening back in the 1970s. They looked at where the CEOs lived in Houston, and they tend to live in Memorial. And they, started saying, well, the decision maker, where the head of the company lives, is really going to drive the decision, not where most of the employees live.
That's true.
And they went and started, developing out in West Houston. So I think, that will happen. There will be satellite locations, and people will. What I think is going to happen is going to be more of a hybrid of people working remotely from home. People, a lot of companies are doing sort of split shift, where
not have traffic. That could reduce the commute traffic.
Right. And so one of the wonderful young people who was on my team at Midway has gone to work she's now the marketing director at the Rice Village. And she's in the office 3 days a week and at home 2 days a week has been sort of her schedule, because she needs to be kind of on the property. And but she's also one of those people who's situated where she has, childcare for kids that can take care of the kids, and she can do that sort of split schedule. So, I mean, there are going to be so many disruptions about what is our business as usual and how we do things. And people are proving to be resourceful and resilient. And here I am, talking to you from a corner of my home office in this tiny apartment where I live. I think, we're figuring out how to adapt and adjust and do things differently. But I know from and this will be, very much my personal perspective, I love working with a team. I love the informal interaction that could happen. When I was sitting at my desk, and in my last job, I not only had an open door policy, I had no door. And so I loved that, people would just drift by and, you'd shoot the breeze, but you'd also bounce questions off of each other. And I know, folks say Slack is great and we have Zoom calls, and there are some wonderful advantages of that. A couple of weeks ago, I facilitated a brand discovery workshop with folks who were in Toronto, Calgary, Seattle, Dallas, Austin, and Houston from here.
Yeah.
And it worked really well. I mean, it worked great. We didn't have the whiteboard where we, our sticky notes, but we had a software program that allowed us to do that. Everybody could share the screen and do that. And thinking about what it would take to schedule that meeting and get all of those high-powered,
I think it really works for the Zoom and all that. Yeah.
So I think we're being adaptable, and we're finding there are ways to do things, but ultimately, humans are social animals. It's a nice way of saying we're herd animals, but we're social creatures, and we crave being in gatherings. And as soon as there is as soon as there's a vaccine, as soon as there is some handle on this germ that's brought great centers of industry to their knees, when that happens, people will come back out and want to socialize and want to congregate, and businesses will want to have, again, that kind of spark of innovation that happens only when you have somebody bump into somebody else in the company cafeteria and say, hey, I was thinking about all of that wonderful interaction that, all kinds of different companies have seen the benefit of having people locate together.
Absolutely. And if you're like, I've been thinking about people are kind of new hires. Yeah, a lot of what we've been doing so far, doing a Zoom with people you already have worked with, you already know.
Right.
What if people move, they change jobs, and how do new people break in? But
it is tough.
Yeah. I don't think it'll last forever, and I don't think it'd be as devastating to the office market as some people have said.
I agree. I think you're right about that, Ralph. I really do. And, we have a tendency also, I think it's a very human tendency to think the way it is today is the way it's always going to be forever. And there's a, I think he's at Harvard, a psychology professor, and it's fascinating because he studies people's reaction to major life events. And he basically says most humans have sort of a set point of happiness. There's just sort of your normal set point of happiness. And, they studied people who won the lottery. They studied people who suddenly had an accident and became paraplegics. And what they find is that within about 90 days of, some huge disruption, some life-altering event, within about 90 days, people have come back to sort of whatever that natural set point of happiness was for them before that life-altering thing that you thought, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I'm happier now than I've ever been. And you settle back down to being, griping and discontent and whatever it was you were before, or right, or you think this is the worst thing that it could have ever possibly happened, and I'll never be the same. And within about 90 days, people are sort of kind of recalibrating. And I think it's been longer than 90 days for us. But I do think it's true that right now we're in this moment. And for people who are dealing with really tough, hard situations, I think for those of us who are fortunate enough that we are relatively insulated from that, it calls on us to be more compassionate and more helpful and more community spirited than ever. And I think that could be a very lasting benefit of what we're going through right now.
Hey, just to remind people, if you're just now catching up here, we're just talking with Ann Taylor from Wide Ranging. My name is Ralph Bivins, and we're talking about the pandemic, of course, but wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about Houston for a second. And just one big project I think that's going on that you would know a lot about is being so plugged in with ULI for so long, and what's the proper name for it? North Houston Highway Improvement Project. That sounds boring, but it's not. It's a $7.5 million project. Is going to change downtown, change the freeways that go through downtown, and it could be really transformative for what's going on. It's being worked through by the Texas Highway Department, and a lot of community impact on it. And it would basically take what a lot of people call it's Interstate 45 or the Gulf Freeway that comes in all the way from Galveston and goes through downtown. And the plan now is, instead of having Interstate 45 go for what a lot of people call the Pierce Elevated, that's going to go away. And we're talking about removing a major freeway from the middle of downtown that hundreds of thousands of people go over every week, and rerouting that from, if you know Houston a little bit, making it turn and go north behind Minute Maid Park, behind the convention center, I guess east, it depends on your behind, but east of the middle of the convention center and Minute Maid, and it would no longer have that Pierce Elevated there. And it would go northward and make it more efficient, TxDOT says. But also going to take out some homes, several hundred homes. I think a couple of churches, there's some businesses that will be demolished, as roads do. The people get compensated, of course, eminent domain, guaranteed to get just compensation, and the U.S. Constitution says they would get their compensation, but it would change things. A lot of people think it'll change things for the better, but there are other people in the community that think it won't.
Mm.
So, what do you think, Ian?
That is a big question, and I think the estimate, at least for segment 3, right? So that's the segment that I've really studied a lot and thought about a lot. Segment 3 is estimated would displace 919 homes, and TxDOT's own study of it has said that there would be a disproportionately high and adverse effects to minority and low-income populations, which they say they will do things to mitigate those adverse effects. And, I think that remains to be seen. It is a project that there's been tremendous amount of public meetings and I'm not sure what an impact the public input is actually having, But I do think that there's an interesting moment that's happening right now in all kinds of different ways where people are thinking about historic inequities and negative impacts on minority and low-income communities. And perhaps what in the past would have been very much a check the box, oh, we had the public meeting, we did it, and now we're going to go ahead and do exactly what we were going to do if we'd never had a public meeting. Maybe there's a chance for an actual dialogue to happen and something to happen, but there's I know that my friends in the downtown management district in particular have done a lot of work around imagining what will happen with capping and putting parks and green space on top of what used to be freeways. I'm here in Austin.
That is going to be pretty spectacular. I do think the cap, if we go through and the cap over the freeway, it could be a very large park with a freeway underneath it. You've seen this at Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, built over a freeway, and what used to be kind of a bunch of junky part of town with maybe a drive-in bank or something, but not much, is now a beautiful park used by people every weekend and during the week, and it's surrounded by new high-rise towers and residential towers. It's made a great place, created a lot of taxable development value on the ground, and it's been pretty successful. And it would be even bigger than Clyde Warren Park in Dallas. I hear it would be.
Well, of course, it's Houston. It has to be bigger than Dallas.
Little D, of course.
Yes.
So, but that'd be a pretty fantastic thing.
It would be, and so I think the thing to do is to keep your eye on the ball and think about the pros and the cons, the costs and the benefits, and who's shouldering the cost and who's getting the benefit. And, to think about not just the homes that are going to be displaced, but also things like elementary schools that are just in the shadow of this widening freeway and those kids. And, there's a cost. And so I think it's important for people to be honest about that and deal with that, and even be willing to listen to constituents that perhaps in the past we did not listen to.
Right. And we've lived through it before. I mean, every freeway that's ever happened, it destroyed some property.
Well, yeah. And
bad, the Katy freeway, was bad because they expanded it to 200 lanes wide or something, and wiped out what would have been a great right of way for commuter.
Real.
Big mistake. One of the biggest mistakes our city fathers did was to let that go to just another freeway expansion instead of taking that opportunity when you had that piece of rail, that railroad line right there would have been a perfect line to put a commuter rail to get people out to Katy and beyond. But
I would agree with you, and I think are we doubling down on? I mean, TxDOT's charge is to move people from Beaumont to El Paso as fast as possible. They're all about throughput. Let's get as many cars as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible from one end of the state to the other. And that means they're going through communities that are being impacted by that. And so, again, I just think it's important to be honest about the cost and to weigh that.
Exactly.
So,
and I do think the one bit benefit to the whole city, you get that big park behind the convention center or east the convention center, and you get hopefully do something great with what's underneath the Pierce Elevated Freeway. And I hope, I know there are a lot of people that say, oh, let's save part of that freeway and make it something.
The Sky Park.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
You don't like the Sky Park?
No, I don't. I think right now it would just be a hot concrete place. That place has been the Pierce has been just a barrier to growth between downtown and midtown for so long. and I just want it gone. And I'd like to see green space there or something, but not let's not try to do but the, you know, copy what New York did. Let's just start fresh, let that go, and let's do a Houston thing. Be my favorite. But since we're talking about downtown, you know, I know you've been with Midway. You know, they've got the Green Street downtown. I don't know. It's pretty cool. It covers 3 blocks, Main, about Main at Dallas, I believe, and that's been a pretty cool redevelopment there that Midway's done. And beyond that, to the east is something we really need to talk about briefly as we move along. But it is interesting. You know, the former Brown and Root site, Brown and Root factory and things and office, but now it's 150 acres on the east side of downtown. Just barely, it's kind of in downtown almost, less than a mile, I think, from.
Less than a mile. That's right.
You know, Midway is going to do a tremendous project there, which could really change it because it's vague. It's not occupied now. And the other important thing about it is that it has a mile of frontage on the Buffalo Bayou coming out of downtown, and so it's in the pipeline. We're waiting for Midway to let us know what's going to happen next. What do you think? If you can think about it, I mean, you may have a lot of inside information you can't put out to the whole world, but what do you think?
Well, I'm not as inside as I used to be, but I love that project. And, you know, people who are interested, I'll put a plug in. You can go to eastriverhtx.com, eastriverhtx.com to see a website and get some more information about that. That was one of the last things that I really worked on while I was still at Midway. And yeah, I think the thing that you mentioned, but is really key to that, is it is less than a mile from downtown. It has more than a mile of frontage on Buffalo Bayou. And, you know, Buffalo Bayou Partnership deserves tons of credit for the work they are doing on the east segment of Buffalo Bayou and the tremendous work that they have done. You know, Ann Olson and team have done going out into the community and really listening and thinking about. We now have plenty of precedent about when huge park projects come through, whether it's the High Line in New York or the Belt Line in Atlanta. You know, it's great and it does marvelous things, but it also can cause a lot of displacement for the folks who have lived there for generations as well. And so I think there's a real effort to think about, you know, how do we make this something that really lifts up an area that's been underinvested for a really long time. When you stand there at East River and you look at the downtown skyline, it is magnificent. And when you just look across the river, you are looking at, you know, the East End and Edo and all the kind of cool stuff that's happening there. But you're also in the historic Fifth Ward. And so something that's really close to my heart as well is the Fifth Ward. And I'm on the board still of the Fifth Ward Community Redevelopment Corporation. And definitely want to give those folks a shout out for the incredible work that they are doing right now in Fifth Ward, you know, to help support that community as well. This property, it's incredible to have 150 contiguous acres anywhere, but that close to downtown in the central business district, and to have, you know, the kind of creativity and the kind of thoughtfulness that I know that Midway and other folks are going to invest in that property is such an incredible opportunity. And I'd say one other thing to think about there is the connectivity to the trails, the opportunity that you would have to, you know, if you live there and you work downtown, even better if you live there and you work there, The ultimate commute would be, but just there is such a great opportunity there to create something very, very special and transformative. And so they've really been taking their time and being thoughtful about it. So the one thing I will tell you, I would encourage you to go to the website and just look at what's already out there, because you can really see what they're envisioning, get a mental picture of sort of the conceptual plan and the density that they're thinking about in that first phase. But one of the things that's going to happen very soon, and one of the big challenges that my former team at Midway faced, was activating that property before it's even built, right? So, I mean, marketing folks, we think a lot about activation and how do you get people into something to experience, because there's just certain things you just got to be there to feel the energy of it, to see what it looks like. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time creating events and doing things to get people to get on the site. And so that'll be something you'll be seeing happening pretty soon, is just various things that will happen to get people to actually experience what it's like to be on that property, even before vertical development is finished. And so,
put that on my to-do list.
I would say definitely put that on your to-do list. And just really quickly, one of the things I would love to say about the Fifth Ward CRC,
Sure.
the Community Redevelopment Corporation, one of their projects that they have worked heroically to see happen is the redevelopment of the old St. Elizabeth Hospital. And St. Elizabeth Hospital was the historic hospital for, at that time they called it the Negro people, the Black hospital for Houston, when they had no hospital. It was built by Sisters of Charity, who I have a long history with as well. And so it has a great history in the community. And Fifth Ward CRC is going to be closing this week on financing to do 179 mixed income units of housing in that old hospital. And,
What street is that on?
Sorry?
What street is that on?
It's on Lyons Avenue. It is on Lyons Avenue. And Lyons Avenue is an area that there's been a lot of attention about, how do we make that a revived commercial corridor? People don't realize maybe that the St. Arnold's Brewery, the St. Arnold's Beer Garden, is kind of an anchor on Lyons Avenue. And then the Deluxe Theater, which is a terrific redevelopment project, is on Lyons Avenue, and St. Elizabeth is also on Lyons. So, that organization has been working overtime, handing out 7,000 meals a week to families, getting over $1 million of just direct sort of pandemic assistance out into the community, building townhomes that are a little more affordable for folks. But the St. Elizabeth project there is one that I'm particularly interested in seeing how that.
We've got their funding, and we're going to see something soon.
Hope so. But they've dealt with NIMBYism too, and so that's NIMBY. Anybody who listens to your podcast, Ralph, will know what NIMBY stands for.
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard. That's right. And so it's just one of those funny.
Everywhere, at least in America, Well, that's great. I'm glad they're moving along.
Yep.
I want to pause for like a 2-second commercial. Okay, 2-second commercial. This here we go. This book that I wrote, Houston 2020, it's available online at Amazon, and Houston 2020, America's Boomtown, by Ralph Bivins. You can Google it and check it out if you get a chance. And we're talking about some of these issues and growth issues and some of these people that we've talked about today. And as we move to the one of our last things here, one chapter we talked particularly about the Astrodome, and which has been vacant for a number of years, but we have a chapter about it and talking about what it means to Houston, Texas, and what it means to our spirit and the way it shaped us. And it opened in 1965 in April, and so Ann is on the board of the Conservancy. This is now a historic place, and it's always been a historic place, but it's got an extra designation. So what's going on with the Conservancy and the Astrodome?
I'm so glad you saved some time for us to talk about the dome, because yes, it is very close to my heart, and I think I share that with you, Ralph. I'm unapologetically passionate about the dome, and I truly do believe that there will be a time in the future when there is this collective head slap of people in Houston saying, "Can you believe we came so close to tearing that down?" There was a movement to tear down the Eiffel Tower in Paris because a lot of good Parisians thought it was hideous and an eyesore. And I think you have done a great job of pointing out that the St. Louis Arch is the exact same age as the Astrodome. And St. Louis understands it is, you know, this iconic feature on their skyline, and they have cared for it and refurbished it, and they understand how important it is.
Millions of people visit it every year.
And I think the dome has exactly that same potential. What's interesting to me is that it is loved and cared about almost more by people outside of Houston sometimes than people in Houston. It's easy to take for granted that thing in your backyard. It's easy for us to take for granted being able to hug our friends and our loved ones. And now that we can't, we realize, gosh, you know, I can't believe I took that for granted. I can't believe I took it for granted that I could sit, you know, and have a beer with a friend in my favorite pub, right? And so I think the Astrodome is one of those things that if, you know, the good people of Harris County make the catastrophic mistake and let it go, one day they'll realize we should not have done that. Right now, obviously, Harris County has much more pressing priorities, and that's very understandable. So the Conservancy is a great thing because the Conservancy can continue. It's a private, you know, sort of private philanthropic organization, can continue to sort of move on things that obviously Harris County cannot right now. But I always think it's important to mention to folks that the dome's not going anywhere. It's very sturdily built. It is not going to fall down. And in fact, if it were to be demolished, it would take a tremendous amount of effort and money and resources to even
$40 million just to tear it down.
Just to tear it down. So, you know, the march is still ongoing, although it's much more behind the scenes, and maybe in 12 to 18 months, they'll be able to re-engage. And I know that there is a documentary that's in the works on a program called American Built, and it's not something that the Conservancy generated. It came to the Conservancy. It's like a series of documentaries that are looking at phenomenal things that have been built in this country, and they came and said, we want to focus on the Astrodome. And these things will happen from time to time where it's not generated even by people in Houston. And so I do think, you know, one of the things that's still out there to be answered, and there are great minds that will help, you know, find the solution for this, is what are the commercial for-profit revenue generators that can help support sort of the, you know, the activation, you know, the vibrancy of that place so that it is a vibrant, active place 7 days a week. And I think that there are people who can figure it out. I will say this, there's been no shortage of creativity about things you could do with the dome. It's never been a question of creative ideas. It's been more a question of political will and finding the resources. and, and competition for priorities, obviously. But I'm very proud of the fact that when I was with the Urban Land Institute, and give all the credit in the world to Phoebe Tudor, one of Houston's great historic preservationists and philanthropists, and Beth Wiedauer Jackson, who was the head of the Conservancy today, but was the senior field officer for the National Trust for Historic Preservation at that time, engaged a national panel. Literally, experts from New York to California came and looked at the dome. And one of the things that they were absolutely free to do at the end of their time of study and interviewing and researching, they were 100% free to come back and say, tear it down. It would have no credibility if they did not have that option on the table.
That makes sense.
And so Wayne Radkovich, who chaired that panel, Radkovich is a developer in Los Angeles who might be best known in Houston as the guy who renovated the old Hughes hangar where Howard Hughes built the Spruce Goose,
Whoa.
which is now occupied by Google.
Oh, good.
Wayne is one of those rare, wonderful people who is a trustee of the Urban Land Institute and also a trustee of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Looked at the Astrodome, that panel of experts, and they say it can and must live on.
Great. Well,
So,
I hope it does.
yeah.
I hope it does. I think I hope people don't get impatient because of the slowdown with the economy and things. But I would like to see it be multi-purpose. I would like to see it be something that people talk about, the St. Louis Arch. They certainly talk about the Eiffel Tower, and they go to any person in the world and say, Houston, Texas. And if they say yes, what one building, what one structure do you know there? A lot of people are going, oh, the Astrodome. It's well known. It was copied by many. And it's very special. And I think we need to think about it in that light, that it could be something special, and the dreams need to be big, and the financing needs to be big. And why can't it be a revenue generator? Why can't it be a place that we get some tourism dollars coming here? People say, I'd like for people around the world to say, I want to go there and see that. Whatever they've done, people are talking about it. I want something so far outside what we're thinking about that people will travel here to see the rebirth of this building and its multiple uses, hopefully, and with the activation of, I think it's 300 acres of parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
Sits there like hot, vacant asphalt. Yeah. I don't know how many days a week, but a lot. And it's there vacant, nobody's there, and it's surrounded by fence. I want to take the fence down. I want to open it up to the people. I want it to be a place that anybody can go. And instead of having the hot asphalt sitting there waiting, and to have people there walking around, they have trees, have people ride the train there. And let's get something going inside. We know from the experts from DOLI that you can create 1,500 parking spaces at the lower levels, which the Astrodome actually has a basement. Let's create 1,500 parking spaces and start from there. But I don't think you're going to be able to do like, oh, it can only be one thing inside. I think it can be many things. I think you could have people working there. You could have people living there. People going there for inspiration, because there's the inspiration of innovation happened there at that place that changed sports everywhere. It changed, how people thought about having dome stadiums, what people thought about. And when they did it, first the grass wouldn't grow, we didn't thought about that. So, do you get the story? No, you're Houstonian. You say, well, hey, let's invent AstroTurf. Bam. And then all the other stadiums, whether they had a roof or not, hey, we want AstroTurf too. But, and yeah, like, and then you think about the time frame that was happening. When you got, the astronauts. The astronauts, why is it called Astrodome? Why were the people dressed up like in spacesuits, like the ushers and stuff? Like, people were talking about space. Where was space happening? It was happening at Johnson Space Center, right down here in Houston. And so it was a time of innovation. It was a place of innovation. I would like to see it reborn as this kind of an epicenter of innovation and thought, and the things that people haven't thought about could be in that building. But it should be open to the whole world, and it should be talked about all over the world. And that's my hope for it. They'd be talked about everywhere. They say, I've got to see what they did.
I love that. Make it so. I hope they make it so. I really do. I will say, Houston has a great history of bold visionary folks who did what seemed impossible. And, having the Port of Houston and the Houston Ship Channel is just impossible. And yet, what would Houston be without that? Having the Johnson Space Center and NASA, the Texas Medical Center. Houston is a place where people do what seemed impossible. And I really think there's a great philanthropic community in Houston who do things, they just have the vision and they have the desire to leave it better than they found it.
And it will be. It will be. And we have a lot going for us right now, and it's a good time to think about change. Ann Taylor, we've had a wide-ranging discussion, and I thank you for being here with me today, and we will we'll be back again, okay?
I'd love it. Thank you so much, Ralph. It's great to see you. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Okay.